District SSPA Task Force meeting Tuesday, June 15th, 2021, Standard Track Meeting 1. I'm Walter Clark, the Mount Vernon Planning Commissioner, and joined by Mr. Tim Sargent, the At-Large Planning Commissioner, and we are your co-chairs for the task force for anyone that may be new that's joining this call. To conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and emergency ordinance, the Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask you in advance for your patience. First, because each member of the task force is participating in this meeting from separate locations, we must verify that a quorum of members are participating and each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I am going to conduct a roll call and ask each task force member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. So the roll call, Mr. Tim Sargent.
Here at the Mount Vernon Supervisor's Office.
Ms. Hillary Clausen.
I'm here at my home in Mason Neck.
Ms. Catherine Ward.
I'm here at my home on Gladstone Place.
Ms. Gretchen Walsh. Mr. David Levine.
Yes, good evening. I'm here at my home in Alexandria.
Ms. Holly Doherty. Mr. Evan Kaufman.
Yeah, this is Evan calling in from Richmond, Virginia.
Ms. Mary Payton. Ms. Queenie Cox. Ms. Ellen Young.
Yes, I'm here. This is Ellen Young at home in Bellevue.
Mr. Hamid Monir. Mr. Lynn Pasco.
Yes, I'm here at my home in Montebello.
And I understand Ms. Tracy Wood will not be joining us this evening. At this point, I will pass the virtual gavel to the co-chairman so that I may be heard to make the requisite motion. I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force.
Do we hear a second?
Second.
Second by Catherine Ward. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures, the fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for the public access for this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for the task force to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which requires the physical assembly of the task force and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that the task force may conduct this meeting electronically through the dedicated audio and video conferencing line, and that the public may access this meeting by registering through the meeting link on the Track a Plan Amendment page of the SSPA website at fairfaxcounty.gov/planning-development/plan-amendments SSPA/South/track-plan-amendment, or by calling 1-844-621-3956 TTY 711 and entering access code 173-103-2390. It is so moved.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second. This is Ellen.
Okay, Ellen seconds the motion. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Let's also note for the record, Holly Doherty is with us too.
Thank you, Tim.
Hey, Holly. Okay, finally, it is next required that all of the matters addressed in today's agenda must address the emergency itself, are necessary for continuity in Fairfax County government, and or statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and discharge of the Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Was that Lynn?
Yes, it was.
All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Sergeant. So we are now open the public hearing, and I'd like to note whether there were any advance written comments that were received, asking of staff.
I didn't receive, this is Graham O, DPD. I did not receive any written comments. Aaron, did you?
No, none.
Okay, thank you. So tonight we have a quick overview on where we are now and the standard track schedule. So we ask staff if they would please go over that information to bring us all up to date and get us moving ahead again.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Clark. I'm going to try to move out of the way of the sun here for a second, but thank you again, Graham Owen with the Department of Planning and Development. Just as a bit of a recap for those of you that are joining from the public that weren't with us during the earlier phase of the implementation phase in the spring. This is the SSPA process. So we're joined by, in addition to the task force that you just heard from, a number of steps, both within DPD, the planning department, as well as from our partner agencies. So just wanted to do a quick round of introductions to those that are here on the call. So I'm Graham Owen, coordinate the SSPA process. I'm joined by Aaron Kleibanner, who is the liaison for the Mount Vernon district, works with me, and also with our branch chief, Megan Van Dam, we're on the call. In addition, we also have quite a few participants from a number of partner agencies, including Tim Cutts. We have Tom, we have Bob Pecora, Palace, Washington. Those guys, excuse me, from SEDOT, as well as Palace, Washington with Community Services. Andy Dorlester with the Park Authority. And if I'm missing any here, I apologize. I'm just going through the list here, but we are joined by a big roster of staff who are interested in the amendments that we're going to be reviewing with you tonight. I just wanted to welcome them, and if you have from the particular items, hopefully they can stick around to answer them during our overview.
Excuse me for interrupting. This is Commissioner Sargent. I just wanted to ask everybody, but Graham, if they could put their speakers or microphones on mute. We're getting some feedback. We want to make sure everybody can clearly hear what Graham is saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sargent. And actually, that's another good prompt, just in terms of WebEx, just generally speaking. So as Commissioner Sargent indicated, the audio works the best when people are muted. So if you can, make sure that your mute button is red. That lets people know that you're not speaking. Of course, turn it on when you're ready to speak, so that we know what you have to say. The other thing that I would mention, if you're new to WebEx, it functions very much like most of the other virtual conferencing platforms that you've probably become familiar with over the past year and a half. A couple of quick features that I'll point out to you. don't want to belabor the point because this is fairly familiar to most of you at this point. But you can mute and unmute. You can also start and stop your video. Those are two buttons at the bottom of your screen. There is also a list of participants that you can click on to see who's on the conference. That's in the bottom right-hand screen. If you have specific questions that you'd rather include in our chat, so staff can get back to you with a response during the meeting or afterwards, just enter it into the chat box. And then also, if you're either a task force member or if you're a member of the public, we have a raise your hand button that's in the bottom right-hand corner of the participants panel. So that allows people to know on the task force, in particular our co-chairs, that you'd like to speak. So when we get to the public comment section of the meeting, participants that are calling in can raise their hand. And also, if you are calling in by phone, you can raise your hand. The way that you do that is by hitting *3 on your dial pad, and that raises your hand in the meeting. So with that, Aaron, if you don't mind, could you make me the presenter? Great, thank you, Aaron. So what we wanted to do today, let me just pull this up. This is the introduction or the kickoff meeting for what we're calling the standard track SSPA process. And so let me get it into the slideshow mode and then I'll pull it up. Just 1 second. All right, can everybody see the presentation and not my notes? All right, good, thank you. All right, so again, we are embarking on kind of the standard track of SSPA. So what we wanted to do is do a very quick overview of where we've been. We did have a series of, I believe, 5 task force meetings over the spring in March and April of this year. So we'll just do a very quick recap of what we did then. And then also talk about our standard track schedule. So this is looking at what we're going to be doing over the next 8 months as we look at the next batch of plan amendments that we're going to be considering. And then what we're going to do is we'll also go into a little bit of detail on the 2 specific projects that we're going to be starting on with the standard track, those being the Mount Vernon Highway SNA, do a brief overview of the amendment as well as a review of the schedule that we have for that. It's following a slightly different schedule than the other, so we'll want to go into a little bit of detail in terms of why and what to expect and when to expect it. And then the main bulk of the presentation that we have for this evening is the Huntington Metro Station plan amendment. So we'll give an overview of the plan amendment parameters, the board authorization, and then we'll also get into the land use considerations, transit-oriented development policies that we have in the county, and then the specifics of the Huntington Transit Station area and the site-specific plan recommendations that we have for the site today. And then we'll go over the existing conditions, the site conditions that we have on and surrounding the site, and then do a quick wrap up with a couple of key pointers in terms of what we'll be looking at from a land use perspective and related topics in future meetings. So this is a very quick review of what we've done thus far during the implementation phase. So we had a series of expedited amendments, those being 2806 Popkins Lane, as well as 2550 Huntington Avenue, also known as the Parker. So in a series of public task force meetings in March and April, we reviewed these plan amendments, looked at the impacts of the amendments, developed plan text with the task force, and the task force did vote on each of those plan amendments. So the Planning Commission, just to make sure everybody knows, the Planning Commission meeting for both of those amendments is next Wednesday. So mark your calendars. Next Wednesday evening, 7:30, we will have the hearings for both of those amendments. So hope we can see you out there. The Planning Commission is meeting in person. So if you want to attend in person, you can. However, you can also call in by phone, as we have been doing for the past couple of months. So now from June of this year until essentially March of Q1 of 2022 is our time frame for the standard track review. So this is looking at Huntington Metro Station and the Mount Vernon Highway SNA. So during this time frame, we'll be looking at policy guidance and also looking at the impacts of our at the impacts of these plan amendments, in the case of Mount Vernon Highway SNA, developing land use scenarios in particular before we study the impacts of these plan amendments. And then also, as we've mentioned previously, the Ingleside Trailer Park was authorized as a part of the standard track. However, the review of that has been deferred pending additional policy work with the Affordable Housing Preservation Task Force, as well as a new task force which is taking up manufactured housing policy more specifically. All right, so this gives you essentially the same thing that we had on the previous slide. So just wanted to make sure that those that were following the nominations during the screening phase know of the difference in the numbers. So if you're searching for the specific numbers, the specific plan amendment numbers on our website, this is the way that you can follow it. So MV3 is now plan amendment 4, MV5 is now plan amendment 5, and then the main planners for these two amendments, Cedric Suzuki, who is also on the call, by the way, forgot to mention him earlier, as well as myself, Graham Owen, were the two main planners for these two amendments. Right. And so just a couple of things that we wanted to point out here. This is our task force proposed schedule. So this is looking topic by topic, meeting by meeting at our current schedule of topics and what we're going to be reviewing at subsequent meetings following tonight. So as you can see, there's going to be different tracks for both of these amendments. Huntington Metro Station and Mount Vernon Highway are the two columns. Oh, something happened with the slide? Oh, you're seeing my notes now. Apologize. 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Apologies. Okay, is that back? Okay, thank you. All right, so this is looking at the task force meeting schedule that we have. And as I mentioned, Huntington Metro and the Mount Vernon Highway SNA are going to follow different tracks in terms of when we're going to be bringing specific topics to this. There is a method to the madness. In particular, the transportation study that we're going to be reviewing for the Huntington Metro Station, given the level of development intensity and density that is proposed. This is very much it's going to be a larger study. It requires a traffic impact analysis. And so in a lot of ways that study is going to inform the total length of the plan amendment that we're going to be dealing with. But in the interim, while that study is taking place, we will be able to also review the other types of impacts and the other topics that are related to this. So looking at public facilities, looking at housing, looking at the July meeting in particular, looking at urban design and transit-oriented design in particular, as it relates to transit station areas and Huntington writ large. And then also focusing on environmental issues. So looking at open space, urban forestry, and other types of environmental impacts, such as stormwater. While we're doing this at the September 7th meeting, so this is post Labor Day, what we wanted to do is have a kickoff for our Mount Vernon Highway SNA study. So start the discussion about the existing conditions that are on the site, and also start a discussion with the task force about land use. So as most of you are probably aware, the authorization for the Mount Vernon Highway SNA study included an expansion of the site from what was originally submitted and originally nominated by Dick Labby to a larger study that encompasses the totality of the land unit in which that area was situated. So in general, the scope of the authorization was expanded. And so what we'll need to do with the task force very carefully is go through kind of an exercise and looking at what types of land use scenarios should be developed as a part of this process. So we have kind of a different starting point, but ultimately we will run it through a similar impact analysis once we've been able to develop the land use scenario with the task force hopefully during that first meeting and maybe in a subsequent meeting. I will say all of this is subject to change, but this is what we have as a kind of a point in time and what we use as a guide as we start to develop out our task force schedule. Then looking into the fall and then into 2022, from the Mount Vernon Highway SNA side of things, we'd start to continue to review the urban design scenarios, do the impact analysis as we were describing for Huntington Metro Station, so looking specifically at public facilities, schools, housing, environmental issues, et cetera. So we still do the impact analysis. So we just come at a later date once we have a land use scenario that's been developed. Also during that time on the Huntington Metro Station, we'd be looking at transportation impacts. So hopefully be able to get the initial results of the traffic impact analysis back and present it to the task force in the fall, if not into December. And then we'd start to have a discussion with the task force about any carryover issues. There's things that really have percolated up in terms of being of particular importance for either of these studies. We want to make sure that those are addressed before we go into the next phase. So with both of these, what we're thinking is that in the Q1 of 2022, we'd start to have a discussion with the task force once we've gone through all the topic areas of interest about the plan text. And so we kind of envision this as perhaps taking on more of a straw man type of approach in terms of developing plan text. So straw man typically involves staff coming up with a draft, bringing it to the task force early, getting their feedback on it, and then coming back at subsequent meetings to change it to ensure that we're bridging any gaps as much as we can between the staff recommendations and the task force recommendations. Hopefully with the goal of achieving consensus. There may be some instances where we don't achieve consensus, but the task force the straw man process is designed to try to get close in terms of our recommendations. So I think that we would like to try to do that with this. And so we're looking right now, projecting that we'd have a task force vote, and if we need to have additional carryover meetings, potentially some open houses with the community outside of the task force meetings in March or in April. And this is all gearing up for going to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors in June and July of next year. All right, so the Mount Vernon Highway SNA study. So it's located in Mount Vernon Supervisor District on the Richmond Highway corridor, is shown in this map. And so this area shown in the white area right here is what we call suburban neighborhood area number 5. And it's located within the SNA, a portion of the SNA, suburban neighborhood area, that is located between the Hybla Valley Gum Springs Community Business Center to the north and the South County Center CBC to the south. So this is an area that's predominantly residential in character. Currently, the plan recommendation is for 5 to 8 dwelling units to the acre across the total site. However, within that total recommendation, there are some specifics. So the area that's at the north, so this is looking at closest to the intersection of Richmond Highway and Mount Vernon Highway. That area is planned for retail and other commercial uses. Along Richmond Highway, the frontage along Richmond Highway that's existing currently as commercial uses largely, that area is planned to be 8 to 12 dwelling units to the acre, so flip over to a residential character. And then the area that's along Mount Vernon Highway, the residential areas that are along Mount Vernon Highway, those are planned for 2 to 3 dwelling units to the acre. So those areas that are currently planned for 2 to 3 dwelling units to the acre, that was the originally submitted nomination area. So when this was brought to the task force during the screening phase last fall, that was the area that was being considered for change. It was going from the 2 to 3 up to 5 to 8 dwelling units to the acre. The board did expand the authorization to encompass the total area for the recommendation area number 5. Since it's kind of a crummy name, recommendation area number 5, we're just referring to it as the Mount Vernon Highway SNA. I think that's better name generally. But what we'll be doing with this, given the board's authorization, which is fairly general in nature, as I mentioned, is looking at generally land use mix, intensity, looking to see what the vision for this area should be in line with the suburban neighborhood area goals, which are predominantly residential in character, and then how it can fit in with the rest of the Richmond Highway corridor plan, which, as most of you are fully aware, concentrates most of the growth in the Richmond Highway corridor into the CBCs. So that'll be something that we develop with you as the task force. Here's a project schedule that we've put together. As I mentioned, we are going to be hiring a consultant to help us with the land use scenarios. So at that first meeting in September, as well as in subsequent meetings if we need to, what we're hoping to do is bring in a consultant that can help us develop out these land use scenarios so that we can test them, so that we can look through a couple of alternatives and look at specific ways in which we can do a different future or a different type, or a range of different futures for this site. So beyond that, the consultant would help us with that initial selection. We'd have the task force take a look at the impacts of the proposals once we've developed out a scenario, in particular, a preferred scenario, and then do the impacts analysis and bring it back to the task force for a vote, as I mentioned, in the later part of in the early part of 2022. All right, and so this is the Huntington Metro Station. So this is the second plan amendment. As you all are fully aware, located in the northern portion of the Mount Vernon Supervisory District, as shown in this map. So the Huntington Metro Station, most of you are familiar with it, but we'll go into some fairly good detail regarding the existing conditions in a little bit. But just as a brief overview, Huntington Metro Station contains the end of the line of the yellow line, which is one of the lines of the Metro rail system, which extends all over the DC metropolitan area. So this is located in Huntington, the Huntington Community Planning Sector, as well as in the Huntington Transit Station area and Transit Development area. And it's an area that, in addition to having the public facilities associated with Metro Rail, so the platform itself, the rail line, associated surface and structured parking, also is planned to develop as a transit-oriented development. And so we'll get into a little bit of deep depth and detail with regards to what that means in a later part of the presentation. Oh no, skipping ahead here. That's okay. So the current plan for the transit station area and for the site in particular, which is shown here in blue, is planned for public facilities on the Huntington Metro Rail area, which is parcel 17E. That's the largest portion of the parcel, which I'm outlining right here. So we have three parcels that we're dealing with in particular. 17E is planned for just the Metro Rail station currently. Parcel 88D, which is the smaller parcel that contains the kiss and ride, as well as the park. This is planned for a mix of uses, including residential, office, and retail. And then there's also an option for hotel in the plan language. I would say that given what's going on in the surrounding area and what's been entitled and what's been built in the area, there is only office and retail potential that's remaining in this land unit, which I'll get to in a little bit. But it factors into what we're going to be doing as part of the authorization. And then finally, there is a very small third of an acre parcel 1A, which is currently planned for office use. This was included in the authorization after the task force's deliberations to ensure that we have, because it's a part of a larger plan recommendation, didn't want to leave it out. It's a small parcel, but it has some office potential. So we wanted to include that in this so that we could look holistically at the site. All right, and so the board authorization. So the board authorized a plan amendment for this site to look specifically at the following: public facilities to continue with Huntington Metro Station, parking structures, of course, and then a revision to that mixed use option that I described previously. So this is looking at a new option of mixed use of 1.5 FAR, which equates to about a 1.8 million square feet of development. So this would include 360,000 square feet of office and retail use, and then up to 1,500 dwelling units on these parcels in low, mid, and high-rise building types between 55 and 200 feet in total height. This is a table showing what we call it a quantification table, but it's a quantification of the net increase that's being requested with this development. So I threw a lot of numbers at you, but I think this is the one that's in particular the most important in terms of density, intensity that we'll be looking at as we review this plan amendment. So the adopted plan, as I mentioned, has a lot of features to it, but I think the important thing to take away is that currently there is no residential density that's available under the current plan. It's all either been constructed with other developments that surround the station, or it's been entitled, and so it's no longer available for use or for further entitlement. And then in addition to that, the adopted plan does have 257,000 square feet of office and 30,000 square feet of retail today. So what we'll be looking at as a part of the proposed plan amendment is a net increase of 1,500 residential units, multifamily units, and then a net increase of 86,000 square feet of office and 9,000 square feet of retail over the adopted plan. So those are the key factors. It's 1,500 net new units, 86,000 square feet of office, 9,000 square feet of retail over the existing, or over the adopted. All right, so that's the Huntington board authorization in a nutshell. So next we'll go over some of the relevant policy plan guidance that can help guide the task force as it starts to look at land use in particular. So we'll start, think of this as kind of an inverted pyramid, but what we'll start with is countywide policy and then narrow down to the site-specific level through various levels of planning geography in the county. So I'll try to do this as quickly as I can, but there are a lot of very important policies, especially at the countywide level, that I think we'll want to review before we dive into the details regarding Huntington. So countywide policy, most of you are familiar with the comprehensive plan, but the comprehensive plan is written where you have countywide policies that are applicable across the county. So these are they're organized into functional elements, land use being one of them. The rest of them are listed here. So transportation, housing, environment, et cetera. These are all topic areas where the comprehensive plan has universal broad stroke goals, policies, and objectives with regards to planning. So the thing that we're going to focus on at this presentation is on land use in particular, but we will be covering most of these topic areas in subsequent meetings. So if there's something in here that you want to see in particular, let us know, because we're still developing out the agendas and we want to know what the task force wants to focus on. So when we talk about land use policy, countywide land use policy, generally what we're talking about are land use pattern, land use intensity, and land use compatibility. So I'll start with land use pattern. So Fairfax County, as you're very well aware, is a very large place and it contains a wide-ranging mix of uses, land uses. And so the objectives in the policy plan seek to ensure that there's a compatible mixture of land uses. In the transit station areas, of which Huntington Transit Station area is one of them, this is really looking at development of mixed use projects. So not just ensuring a compatible mix of uses, but actual mixed use projects. So multiple types of uses within one site or within one project. And then also that the county should encourage diverse housing stock with a mixture of enhanced opportunities for county residents to live and work live where they work or near where they work and in proximity to mass transit. A couple of reasons why we want this, ensuring that people can live and work close to live near where they work, for example. That's one of the most efficient things from a transportation perspective. It really encourages efficiency in the transportation network, encourages transit ridership, and the inverse of that, decreasing automobile dependency. So this allows people to live close to where they work. And then the other part of this in terms of the pattern is ensuring that when we're setting land use pattern, that we're doing so in a way that maintains stable residential neighborhoods. And then also infill. So we do have some policy regarding infill development. So infill development should be of a compatible use type and intensity or density to ensure that we're not negatively impacting surrounding properties. So what do we mean by intensity? Intensity is a metric most of you are familiar with it. We express it generally with regards to floor area ratio or FAR. There are other methods of looking at intensity in particular, but it's a measure of how much development should we be looking at in a particular area. So a couple of things in particular that stand out for transit station areas is that objective 12, the location and the level of development intensity should be used to set and help establish other county goals. So it's looking at a metric as a tool basically for achieving county goals. And then in the mixed use centers, so Tyson's are some of our suburban centers, and specifically in our transit station areas, this is where we want to concentrate the highest levels of development intensity, while acknowledging that we really do need to, when we're looking at these higher levels of intensity and density, that it should be balanced with this necessary supporting infrastructure. And then also development intensity, looking at concentrating development intensity and density in the TSAs should be looked at as one method of achieving the production of affordable housing in the county. Land use compatibility. So what do we mean by compatibility? Compatibility in this instance, we're talking about minimizing undesirable visual, auditory, environmental, and other impacts created by potentially incompatible uses. And one of the ways that we do this is through compatible transitions between land uses, and then also through the use of urban design principles. So those county-wide policies that I was describing in terms of land use pattern, intensity, and compatibility, those are best illustrated in this map. You're probably familiar with this, but I'll go over it very briefly. This is what's called the concept for future development. So it's kind of the embodiment or the illustration of county-wide policy in a map. And so this map describes across the county the various mixed-use centers that we have across the county, and where kind of at the broadest stroke imaginable, this is where the county wants to concentrate employment growth as well as mixed use growth is in these areas that have varying shades of color. And this is not a very good graphic, unfortunately, I'm realizing now, but the area that we have of interest in particular is this beige area with the M, and that's the Huntington Metro Station. So this is one of these areas where employment growth in particular is planned to be concentrated. So transit station areas. Transit station areas, they're unique. We have 14 of them in the county. And these are areas where we, as I mentioned, we are trying to concentrate urban growth, employment growth, and the highest densities and intensities of non-residential and residential growth. There's a lot of reasons for doing this. One of them is to support Metro. So trying to ensure that we have a transit network that's vibrant, that's viable, gives people choices. In addition to being able to have a car, we want to be able to ensure that we have places in the county where people can forego a car, that they can get around more or less exclusively by transit. And these areas are also envisioned to be highly walkable, highly bikeable, places where you can use a variety of modes to get to where you're going, in addition to your car. So this is where we have the highest intensities and densities, as I've described, and they're very important in terms of where we want to concentrate urban growth. So we related to the transit station areas, of which Huntington TSA is one, is this concept of TOD, transit-oriented development. So this is kind of a strategy, if you will, for concentrating urban growth, medium and high density growth in the TSAs while protecting stable neighborhoods. We do have one specific objective in the land use element of the policy plan that calls for having focused growth near certain planned and existing rail transit station areas. And as I mentioned, ensuring that these areas are compact, pedestrian, bike-friendly neighborhood centers. We also have guidelines in the land use element for PSAs, for TOD. A couple of ones that jump out in particular: transit proximity and station area boundaries. So this is really saying that the highest concentrations should obviously be located closest to the station proper. And then it should taper out in terms of intensity and density the further out you get from the metro station. There is flexibility with regards to these guidelines in terms of how they apply across the 14 TSAs. So there's some very general guidelines that I can drop in the chat once I'm finished with the presentation that you can take a look at, but there is some flexibility that's afforded for each situation. A lot of these we will cover in subsequent presentations with regards to transportation, with regards to housing, design, environmental considerations. But I think that the main takeaway from a land use perspective is that the TOD guidelines really do call for a mix of uses. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of them, again, in supporting Metro, is ensuring that you have both peak and off-peak commuting patterns that can be provided on Metro, and ensuring that you have a range of activities that are going on throughout the day that can only be generated by a mix of uses. And then also with regards to phasing of development, it's another thing that's very important in the TOD areas, is that a lot of these projects, they're large projects that are phased. And so the guidelines call for, when you have phasing of development, ensuring that there is a mix of uses that's provided at each phase, so that you basically are ensuring in an iterative way the implementation of TOD. I mentioned this a couple of times, but we are in the near term going to be talking about other policy plan elements related to TOD. Transportation will be the next one in 2 weeks, and we'll get an overview of a variety of modes and a variety of planning efforts related to TOD on the next meeting on the 29th. Then we'll jump into urban design and revitalization on July the 13th, and then get into impact analysis for public facilities, housing, and environment after Labor Day. All right, so from TOD, now we'll go down to Huntington TSA and the Huntington Transit Development Area. So Huntington TSA, this is the area that's outlined in yellow and red. So this is an area that constitutes the majority of the Huntington Community Planning sector, which is the area that's located between Richmond Highway, Route 1, as well as Telegraph Road, and is bounded on the north by Cameron Run. So this is the TSA where we want to concentrate most of the urban style developments in the county is within these TSAs and the other mixed use centers. Within the TSA, you have this area that's dashed in green, which is the transit development area, and this is where the highest intensities are assigned. So the TDA, the area in green, this is based on the concept of a 5 to 7 minute walk from any of these locations to the metro station. So this is where the walkability and the bikeability are really emphasized in the planning efforts in particular. This is the land use plan for the TDA. So the area that we're dealing with in particular is the area that's outlined in bold gold. But the TDA plan is shown here. So a couple of things to look at. Blue is the land use assignment of public facilities. So this is looking at the metro station in particular. Mixed use is the area that's in yellow. So this is looking at the areas to the north and to the south. Higher density residential development is the area in red and brown. Open space is green. And then areas in purple are office uses. So as you can see, taking the transit station area and the policy guidance that we have countywide, this is the application of those principles in terms of the mix of uses. So this is looking at the base plan mix of uses that we have for the site. I mean, we'll say it gets even, as we've mentioned previously, it gets even more specific when you get down to the site level. So as many of you are probably aware, this is a reflection of the base plan. So there is an option currently on our site that we're looking at in particular for an even greater mix of uses. So mixed use all the way through. Pedestrian circulation. This is another important element, kind of a key variable in terms of the Huntington transit development area. So a couple of features that you'll want to consider and that we'll certainly want to walk through with the task force in terms of pedestrian circulation, since walkability is so important. Are the major walkways that we have on North Kings Highway, which is the main north-south artery through the area, as well as Huntington Avenue, which is the main east-west artery. So those are areas that are envisioned to be the major walkways that are enhanced through streetscaping and superior design of those roadways. Other features that I'd also want to point out, because they tie into connections with the other areas, are the trails, which are the areas that are shown in the smaller dots. So those are envisioned to connect the Huntington metro station with surrounding land units. So looking at Huntington Club, for example, to the northwest, and then looking at the courts at Huntington, for example, to the southeast. So those areas, it's all intended to tie surrounding developments into the Huntington metro station to make them more walkable than they are today. One other feature I point out here, plazas and other public spaces. Those are the little green stars that you see there. So those are areas that are envisioned to become better public spaces than we have today. So one is on our site or immediately off of it. And then one is across North Kings Highway at Huntington Station Shopping Center. So those are areas that are intended to be gathering spaces, plazas. I would say that we are also looking with the 2550 Huntington. This map is being updated as a component of that. And I expect that as the task force process gets underway, that this is something that we would want to take a look at in particular as we refine our recommendations for the site. Height. So this is another thing that's important in the transit development area, is looking at varying heights and ways of tapering height in particular when you're near surrounding low density residential neighborhoods. So a couple of height limits that we see in this area. Areas that are closest to Huntington Metro Station in the adjacent Huntington Club community, as well as the courts at Huntington, are planned for 200 feet, excuse me, in total height. Some areas that are closest to the elevated yellow line tracks across Huntington Avenue are also similarly planned for higher height limits. And then areas that are getting closer to the low density or lower density residential areas have lower height limits. So looking at 55 feet, for example, that's the transitional height limit in the Huntington Club development, for example. So it goes from 200 feet, tapers down to 55 feet when you're closest to North Kings Highway. One piece that you'll probably notice is the absence of a height limit in the Huntington Metro Station area, our area of focus, or at least the majority of our area of focus. So I imagine that'll be a topic of conversation, but I just wanted to point out that we don't currently have a height limit on our site. This is open space and landscape buffers. So similar concept, this is looking at areas where we're looking to have some form of landscape buffering as envisioned in this plan. This is looking specifically at the TDA buffer from surrounding residential communities. So once again, there's not a lot here for our specific area. So I think this is one area that we will also want to take a look at through the task force process. All right, so that's policy. Let's go into existing conditions. This is a view of the site. So this is underneath the elevated yellow line track, looking north from the northern kiss and ride. And as you can see, kind of in the background there, you'll see the yellow features of the Parker. So that's 2550, the development that we reviewed during the expedited amendment. This is an image showing the southern garage. So this is a garage that's on the site currently. It was built in the 1970s. It's no longer in use. My understanding is that it's structurally deficient. So it's not being used by commuters currently. It's not open for vehicles. So this, in addition to the area that is immediately behind this, which is the southern kiss and ride area, this is the area that the WMATA team, when they were putting their concepts together, have really kind of envisioned this area as being kind of that initial phase for development. It's also the area that's planned for the bus rapid transit station. So this is a very critical area for the kind of the nearer term development potential of the site. So we'll want to focus on this a lot in terms of its kind of more immediate implications for development. This is showing the platform. So this is kind of in the middle section of the site. So as you can see, there's the metro trains, you have the platform. One thing that you can't really see here with this particular image, but I'll show in a second, is the topography of the site. You can see it a little bit here with the wooded area going up to Huntington Club, but it is a very slope challenged site, as we might say. There's a high degree of topography, and there's also, interestingly enough, given that we're immediately adjacent to a transit station, there is a conservation easement on a portion of this wooded area to preserve the slope and to preserve the trees. So that's something that we'll also take a look at when we're discussing this from an environmental standpoint in a couple of months. This is an image hopefully illustrating the slope a little bit better on the site. So it is unique in terms of its slope challenges. The image that I'm showing you on the right-hand side shows the platform. The tracks actually run under the southern garage, so the track to continue for at least another 1,000 feet or so is my understanding. So this is an interesting site. It starts out elevated at the north and then dives into the hill as you go further south. The rise, the bottom of the site at the north along Huntington Avenue, so this is in the bottom right-hand corner of the site, that's at about 30 feet elevation above sea level. And then if you go all the way up to North Kings Highway, that's at about 160 feet above sea level. So there's a good degree of slope change from the north to the south. And you can see that slightly here, but maybe best illustrated by looking in particular at the stacking of the garage. The stacking of the garages, especially the middle one and the middle one and the northern one. We are surrounded by, in some cases, lower density residential uses. So there's two neighborhoods in particular that immediately surround the site. So the Huntington neighborhood, as well as the Jefferson Manor neighborhood, those are predominantly existing duplex and single family developments planned for 8 to 12 dwelling units to the acres. So kind of a lower to medium density range. This is the Parker, which is immediately to the north along Huntington Avenue. That's planned for a 2 to 3 FARs. You're all familiar with it, and a mix of uses. It's going through a plan amendment process for those of you that weren't following the existing the expedited amendment process. But that will be looking at a new mix of uses, including ground floor retail, but largely taking this area that's kind of the donut hole and allowing for a residential, predominantly residential use in that area. And then this is the area, and I should have labeled this, so the orientation on this may be confusing, so I apologize. But these are the courts at Huntington. So these are the areas immediately to the south, and was developed as a part of a plan actually for Metro Station back in 2000, the year 2000, rezoned as a component of a larger redevelopment that included the Metro Station, but it includes multifamily residential as well as some townhouses. A couple of other developments that aren't shown here, but are kind of in the works in various forms. Huntington Club, this is went through a planning process a couple of years back and is going through currently going through the entitlement process right now, which is looking at a new mix of uses, transit oriented in nature, fairly high FAR. And the other one is to the south, which is Abington. This is a development that was recently entitled last year, looking at several hundred new multifamily units. So that's looking to be almost immediately adjacent to the area that will become the BRT station at the southern entrance. One thing that I wanted to mention here, and this may be better viewed, and I'll put it up on the website as an actual standalone image. But this is an image from the rezoning application that was entitled back in the year 2000, which shows the courts at Huntington at the southern end of the station and the townhouses. In addition to those kind of larger features, which I'm circled right here, these are existing today. They've been constructed. In addition to this, kind of importance to our site in particular are the areas that were rezoned for a different mix of uses on our site, which included multifamily residential development of up to 120 stories in height, so kind of a higher rise option, as well as an office building, 120 feet in total height. So though neither of those were constructed, the high-rise residential has been rezoned again and is associated with the Abington proposal. So that has been reduced in the total number of floors, but that is generally more from a high-rise orientation to a mid-rise orientation. The office building has not been built and has not been pursued. So that office potential, 250,000 square feet of office potential, remains in the plan and is actually being upped as a part of this plan amendment to allow for potentially a land bay that would include an office building. It just doesn't necessarily have to be at this location. It could be to the north, for example. That's what's being proposed with the Wilmot's proposal. Lastly, there was as a part of this rezoning application, I believe about 20,000 square feet of retail that was associated with this particular development application that would have been immediately to the south of the southern garage that remains unbuilt. So retail is another component of the plan amendment that we'll be looking at and want to consider carefully. I will say that this development, it was the embodiment of our transit station area planning that we had in place at the time. Our understanding of TOD has evolved over the years. So we do have the newer transit-oriented development guidelines that we can use in the evaluation of projects in the future and plan amendments in the future that we can hope to guide the mix of uses as well as the elements. So this is what we had at the time, 20 years ago, and we'll be looking at a new future for this site, in particular the area to the north, as we go through this planning process. So just a couple of I'll leave, this is the last slide that I have. There's just a couple of items that I wanted to flag and to just kind of wrap up the discussion and hopefully serve as jumping off points. One is just a reminder that the comprehensive plan is long range in nature. So we're looking 20 years plus out in terms of our planning horizon. So when we're thinking about land use mix, just make sure that you're keeping that long range orientation in mind. Also, I've probably said this enough times, but the transit station areas are the areas that are envisioned to have the highest intensities of planned development. And that should be balanced with supporting infrastructure at each phase to ensure that we're able to achieve community goals. And then once again, mixed use. So in particular, looking at what is the right balance and the right mix of uses for these transit station areas so that we can have employment growth as well as residential growth. And with that, we will get into the character of development. We've talked a lot about pattern, intensity, mix at this meeting, but we'll start to get into, in subsequent meetings, we'll start to talk about the character of development. So looking at streetscape, building forms, building design at future meetings, as well as impacts to public facilities in subsequent meetings. So with that, I am finished. Does the task force have any questions for me that I could answer right off the bat? And I apologize if people have been including things in the chat. I haven't been able to view them during the presentation. Get to them.
Graham, it's Lynn Pasco. Two things struck me. One is you're not talking about large developments that are already there, just over the hill and such. I live in Montebello, which is one of the big ones, but there's a lot of other people that already live there in large things. And then the huge amount of development that we are beginning to see in North Gateway, which is going to increase further. It seems to me it's necessary when we're talking about what the surrounding area looks like that we don't emphasize only the duplexes. I mean, there's a tremendous range of housing there already. You're muted, Graham.
Yeah, sorry about that. I agree with you, Lynn. Just wanted to bring up this slide in particular, which is showing the transit station area and the transit development area, because you're right. The area of Montebello in particular, that's land unit Q. It's technically immediately outside of the transit development area, but it is important. It does have kind of a higher intensity of development that you're describing there. It's not within the transit development area, but we can come back to the task force and talk kind of more about the character of that form maybe at the July meeting in particular, when we can talk about building form.
You also have it in R and the other areas along there. And certainly the huge development going on the Riverside complex there. So we're really talking about an awfully high density area already. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
Graham, this is Catherine. I put a note in the chat, but I'll bring it up now. With the Planning Commission and the BOS, et cetera, meeting face to face these days with some call in, where do you anticipate over the next 7-8 months of this process? Are we going to have to come face to face? Are we going to continue Zoom? Or whatever this thing is? What are we going to do? What's the process for that?
For the task force, we know through July at least that we're going to be able to continue to meet in person. Beyond that, we don't know. We will find out as soon as we can, because I know that everybody wants to be able to plan. We certainly want to be able to plan for an eventual return to in person. I don't know the exact date though that we're going to have to return at this point. I think it's still very much in flux. I will say that the Planning Commission is meeting in person, and the board is meeting in person. So one thing in particular, if you are going to be attending the Planning Commission next week, you can go in person to the government center. However, you can also call in. And so we did confirm, Catherine, because you raised a question about whether it's people need to call in versus they call you. But the answer is yes, you call in and they'll unmute you at the appropriate time. So that's the way to interact.
Okay, well, we'll talk offline about the number to call and when to call and all that nonsense. With the task force for going forward, I would assume if we are called to have to do this face to face, because the emergency is over, that we will meet at the Mount Vernon Government Center and not be required to schlep out to you guys.
The
So
exact,
put that in your head, because I gotta tell you, I think you got a lot of people on this call that are not gonna want to schlep out to the government center. Mount Vernon District is our home. That's where this is, and we would expect staff to come to us.
understood. Absolutely. We'll look at a number of facilities that are in your area, because I agree. I don't think that anybody expects you guys to come all the way out here. We'll
Graham, can I ask a question? Thank you for the presentation. I think this was just really interesting. And at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about how the county encourages a mix of use, the residential, the business, recreation, and I'm wondering about the recreational aspect of the planning. So it seems like we have parks in there, but are other recreational activities or businesses, how are those evaluated? How does the county evaluate the need? So I'm thinking, a little bit about the Top Golf site over in Franconia that's being converted to residential. That was a huge recreational center for a lot of people. So that's going away. So how does the county kind of evaluate the need for recreation and look at those kinds of applications?
So that's a great question. There are a couple of ways that we do this. So one, when we started the review of this plan amendment with our agency partners, including parks, including with neighborhood community services, we put out a request for comments. And so a big part of the discussion that we're going to have in subsequent meetings when we're going over impacts is looking specifically at what are going to be the park needs of future residents. What are going to be some of the needs from a neighborhood and community services standpoint, community centers, for example. What's out there today in terms of the existing services, the existing parks, what's out there today, and then based on the increases that we're looking at with this plan amendment and the new character of the development that's being proposed, what's going to be the new need. And so that will be a big part of future meetings where we get into kind of the details about services and about parks, about schools, for example, another big one in particular that we'll need to take a look at. Yeah, go ahead.
And can I,
if I can just follow up, I'm sorry. So the focus then would be on county facilities, parks, rec centers, that
Correct.
sort of thing, but not anything that the private sector would bring into that mix.
So I think in terms of our planning for it, there's a couple of ways that we could look at that. Looking at the private sector and kind of the more business end of things. One of them that's been used in the past is from a metric standpoint is looking at activity density. So kind of the traditional metric is, looking at from a residential standpoint of dwelling units to the acre, fairly typical. And then from a non-residential perspective is looking at FAR, floor area ratio, just characterizing how much intensity. Another way of looking at it that we could look at if there's interest is activity density. So this is looking at, what is for these kind of areas that are higher density in terms of their orientation and the way that we want them in the future. Are either of those metrics sufficient to capture what we're getting at and what we want in terms of a vision for a mixed use environment? It's not that activity density is the sole metric for doing that, but it's one way of hopefully capturing kind of a bigger picture example. But I'd be interested in hearing more in terms of kind of the specific needs of businesses ourselves, because it's not typically something that we get into. What are the needs of businesses that are associated with the plan amendments? But I think it's something we could follow up with the Economic Development Authority on and others, for example.
Oh,
And this is Megan. This is Megan. I just wanted to add, as part of the requirements for development, the county does look for the provision of on-site recreation as part of the development, and that would be provided by the developer. And then just to clarify, the off-site recreational impacts would be to county park facilities, to athletic fields, to soccer fields, to other types of active recreational facilities. So they would be doing both of those calculations as part of looking at the impact of the new residents for any residential development. Uh, and so that would be provided for you, as Graham said, within within our impact analysis in the coming months.
Thank
this
you, Megan.
is Catherine. Can I make a statement? And Holly, I agree with you. There's like Top Golf, it takes up a lot of space, yes, but let's say there's something similar to that that doesn't take up a lot of space, and it is a private business. Just because the developer provides recreation on site for their tenants or their owners and a little pocket park for the rest of us to stroll through, it doesn't provide a vibrant area necessarily in this corridor of North Kings Highway and Huntington Avenue between Route 1 and Telegraph Road. And there ought to, perhaps, as Holly suggests, some kind of discussion on how do we inject some sort of business recreation along with all this other stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Catherine. Thank you. I just think it's a discussion that we need to have if this is something that we need to incentivize or at least think about. And I'll kind of pass that over to our two planning commissioners that are here. But, you know, we used to have movie theaters. They're gone. We used to have a Top Golf. It's gone. The land is so valuable, you know, that it's used for these high density developments. But is there a way as a community that we can encourage that so that we don't just become a community of high-rise residential and office and retail, and we don't have anything other than the parks, the county parks and rec center that's available for recreation?
Yeah, so this is Mary. I used to live over there in one of the little duplexes north of Huntington, and there are recreation areas back along the river, kind of informal, but I haven't been back there much since they put in the dams, the berms, but there used to be a fair amount of fields and recreational areas back there. And I think anywhere along the river, it's a really good place to use the land for recreational fields rather than buildings, because it does flood occasionally, used to anyway.
Graham?
Oh. There are some
There's
public comments.
Yeah.
If the task
Well,
force.
and may I just kind of close up on that? I think that's definitely something to think about. I think really as a conversation too at the level of the Huntington area about how we're kind of creating what commercial development is coming in and what are we creating in there. So I appreciate the comment, Holly, and certainly I think having a conversation with the park authority only about this topic seems a bit limited, because their scope of work is really about the county facilities, and what you're talking about is something much broader. And it's really a question of, as we think about what type of of commercial development may be included within this or in other developments within the Huntington area, as you know, which is it's a commercial, but it's also sort of private recreation. You know, that's something that we can continue to talk through as we work through this plan amendment. So.
I'll jump in here. Commissioner Sargent, you're about to say something as well.
They lost power there. Walter just texted me. So the Mount Vernon Government Center lost power.
Okay, well, there are some comments from the public. We could go to that.
I'm sorry, do you want to do public comments without the planning commissioners?
Well, we don't know when they're going to get their power restored. Everything will be on the recording that people can watch later.
I think we should pause for a second and just wait and see if we can get their connection restored.
I don't think.
I'll send them a call-in number so they can at least call in by phone.
Are you texting Walter to tell him that? Okay, thank you. I'll let him know.
Did anything happen to Mary? I got a yellow triangle for her as well. Did anyone else get kicked out of the meeting? Or
Well, I think they're having some power outages, Megan. I have a whole house generator, but my house lights flashed on and off, and then the generator started to go on, and then it shut off. So I don't know what's going on.
Mary's up by me. She's up the hill, and we didn't have any flickers or anything here. So we're usually one of the first to have trouble with no power, but we're fine.
The yellow triangle indicated that she had low bandwidth.
Oh.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're
Biani's
dialing
lost
in now.
power. Yeah, some other
Okay.
people lost power. Mark just texted me, Biani, to say he's got problems too.
Okay.
It looks like Nick is back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We lost power too. Sorry, y'all.
And Tim left the building. Oh, Tim is back now. Oh, there it is. Tim went, turned things back on.
Had to get my flashlight.
I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. Just disappeared.
No worries. Well, I think we have our quorum, so we can continue whenever we're ready. And I'll send Mary an email with the call-in information, so hopefully she can continue with us. Commissioner Sargent, before you dropped off and before the power was lost and everything like that, you're about to say something.
I'm afraid to start again. Look what happened. My one comment about the recreation, I thought those were very good comments. Something to look into during the process, toward that end, is the availability of parking space as well. It's either a very expensive or a very limited commodity in some cases, and that can influence that kind of commercial recreation. So just something to look to from some subject matter experts as they explore that. That's it.
Would this be a good time for public comments?
What time are we? I think, yes, Aaron, I agree with you. Public comments, this would be a good place for that.
All right, so Aaron, I think you can unmute people in the attendees
Yeah.
section. Okay, so it looks like Doreen Brown has her hand raised.
Hi, Doreen. You're unmuted, so go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. This is the first meeting I'm attending. So my question or my comments may have already been dealt with, but I live just off Mount Vernon Highway on Cephas Court, which borders the section which is highlighted PA 2021-0004. And I note that the current proposal is for 2 to 3 DU per acre, but the planned amendment is for, is it 5 to 8 or something? You know, higher density. And, you know, as an owner and a resident in this area, and also, you know, having spoken to my neighbors, we are concerned about the higher density for a couple of reasons. One, because of the fact that Mount Vernon Memorial Highway is a very small one-lane road. So we're concerned about the higher traffic, you know, congestion, you know, if there is increased density. Secondly, when you talk about compatibility, most of the properties along Mount Vernon Highway tend to be 2 to 3 DU per acre or less. And so increasing the density would change the character of the community. So we're concerned about that. And parking is a big issue for us. We live on a small cul-de-sac, and right now we're having difficulties parking on our street because there's a community next door to us, which are townhouses, you know, which face Richmond Highway. And a lot of people from those townhouses actually park on our street, and our street is very small. So we're concerned that if there's increased density, there tends to be, you know, a higher number of renters in some of these communities. And so you end up with a lot of vehicles trying to find parking spaces, and they take the small parking spaces in front of our homes. So we're very concerned about that. So, you know, our preference, you know, we agree that there's need for development, and we look forward to having the development because that will help to improve our the marketability or the market values of our properties. But we're just concerned about the density. So, you know, we would recommend to the Planning Commission to consider this, the character of the community, the traffic congestion, parking, and, you know, how this is going to impact the rest of the owners and residents in the area. So that's the concern that we have. And the second thing is, you know, what do you plan to do with the existing residents in those properties which are targeted? I know there are military vets who live there. There are others, renters who live there, and, you know, a lot of them are low income persons. So I'm you know, we're also concerned about displacement and how you will address this. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
So Doreen, if I could, thank you for your comments. I think we will certainly take those into consideration in the meetings where we have for the Mount Vernon Highway SNA study, which will most likely kick off in September. So I would just say, if you can, please continue to attend these meetings when we're going to start getting into the details of that particular amendment. Regarding compatibility in particular, one of the things that the board has asked us to do is look at a new mix of land uses and assign an intensity and a density for those land uses. So I think compatibility and the design of any development that's going to be recommended as a part of this comprehensive planning effort. Compatibility will be a big part of this, considering that we're in a residential area, suburban neighborhood area where it's supposed to remain, or it's predominantly planned to remain as residential in character, not at a higher rise density either. And then also with regards to traffic congestion, we will be bringing back the results of our transportation assessment after the scenarios are developed. So more to come on that. I think we'll have a better picture of what the traffic increase may or may not be once we go through those land use scenarios. We can also look at parking as a result of that and ensure that we have adequate language regarding parking. And then with regards to displacement and the existing residents that are on the site, I think that we can certainly talk to the property owners with regards to the existing situation with the people that are living there today, and we can follow up on that. So thank you for those comments, and I hope that you can attend future meetings when we're discussing the amendment in detail. And I would just say that we're kind of at the beginning of this process. We're not at the end, so please stay. I think there'll be a big role for the community in this as well.
There are no more public members of the public asking to speak.
Thank you, Aaron. If there are no further public comments, any closing comments from the task force?
I have a question on scheduling of things. Since one of the recommendations for the site on Popkins Lane is to actually get it out of the fast track and pushed into the standard track. We don't know how the Planning Commission is going to vote on that, but that will be and is the recommendation from the task force that I'll be presenting on their behalf next week. If it is approved by the Planning Commission and the BOS to shove it back, how would it fit into this longer schedule? And I don't need an answer now. I hope it's something y'all are considering depending on what the vote is from the two commissions.
Yeah, we'll need to take a look at it, Catherine, just depending on how things shake out. The topics that we have in terms of the roster, it's very much tentative and subject to change, and we can adapt, based on certain situations. So thank you for that.
All right. Well, Mr. Sergeant, any comments?
Just observations. Graham, thank you very much for the great presentation. It's always helpful to see that information and review it and see where it stands in today's planning environment versus when we started. Appreciate the comments and questions from everybody too. So thanks for kicking it off.
All right. So our next task force meeting, number 2, is June 29th, and we will hear the Huntington Metro Station Transportation Existing Conditions and Study parameters that we will go over at that meeting. And in between now and then, everyone be safe, and we can adjourn, and hope to see most of you next Wednesday night at the Planning Commission public hearing for our expedited votes that we had. All right.
This is a
Everybody's power
motion
to stay on.
Motion to adjourn.
So we have a motion to adjourn.
Yep, motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All right, it's been moved to second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thanks again
Good night,
for a great
everybody.
primer.
Yeah, that was really good, Graham. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. That was very good.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. Thank you, guys.
All righty.
Take care, everybody. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
See you later.